everybody. Welcome back to Hollis Does Brunch. If you're a returning member, if you're here for the first time, then welcome, doubly so. My name is Hollis, and I started this series to convene folks around music and home cooking since we're all stuck at home, staying safe, but also for us to be able to connect as community during this time, even though it's a time of profound isolation and disconnection. It's important for us to all feel connected and together, and to also make sure that we're tapping in and centering the voices that we don't often hear and the folks are most at risk now during this public health crisis. So happy Easter to those who celebrate, and sending love to folks that aren't able to be with their family today. And also a very happy belated Passover to folks that are of the Jewish faith. And if you don't celebrate anything at all, then just it's one big agnostic party all the time. I'm going to perform a song off my new EP, Half-Life, and it's a song just about really understanding and centering what you need at this time. I think there's kind of this misperception that just because we're all chilling at home that we are necessarily taking care of ourselves and almost indulging ourselves in what we need, and I think that is often pretty far from the case. So this is just my petition for you to really think about what you need during this time, in spite of all of the other needs that people might have of you. How can you center yourself and give some back to yourself? So the song is called Back to Me. You don't give me what I need, no, but I know nobody can give me everything. And lately I've been thinking you don't see what I see. And I get so impatient when I really should just breathe, yeah. Gotta give a little back to me, yeah. Oh, 'cause it's so lonely running circles in my mind. Gotta give a little back to me, yeah. I told myself instead of always wasting all my time, yeah. Hey, I can't depend on nobody to make me happy, no. And there's beauty inside that I'm understanding now, yeah. You can't see it reflected until it's within, in the way that it's been wearing me thin, all the tension above my skin now, yeah. I don't know quite what to say, but I know I'm done pretending everything's okay. And I've been overcompensating, trying to appease. And I gotta remember I'm deserving of relief. I gotta give a little back to me, yeah. Oh, 'cause it's so lonely running circles in my mind. Gotta give a little back to me, yeah. I told myself instead of always wasting all my time, yeah. I gotta pull down the curtain, taking in the mission, something to miss, so am I only tripping, floating in space, all the hypotheticals, think I got it, then I let it go, catch and release, there's a piece that I'm missing, I better be sweet to me, better just listen, harder to handle, I hold myself close, gonna love me the most, Where is everyone? I am really excited that this Sunday we are joined by two folks that really have fundamentally inspired me, not only as an artist and as a person in community, as a teaching artist, but are also two wonderful dear friends of mine who are super hilarious and silly and rad people. So I'm really excited to share digital space with them today, and I'm going to bring them in now. But everybody, please say hello to MADlines and Nikkita Oliver.
Hi.
What's up, y'all? Peace.
Happy Easter. It's Easter today for those who celebrate.
Well, you were just gathering with your family on a Zoom call, right?
Yep, we do it every Sunday, but I actually forgot it was Easter. But for a lot of people, it's an important day. You know, some people might be getting in their Sunday best and doing Zooms. So
that's real. Yeah. How has the family Zoom time been for you?
It's been good. It's really interesting because sometimes we don't talk, like the way we're talking in Zoom is a way that we haven't always talked when we were together. So sometimes we get more updates. It's interesting.
I think that's real. I think that in some ways, like especially for family, where it's like the physical reality of us coming together, like there's such like concrete dynamics within gathering as family, and now that those have kind of been loosened, there's some like opportunities for stuff to bubble up that haven't otherwise happened before. So yeah, Nikita, how are you feeling? How are you doing?
Doing good. This is like my third Zoom call of the day. You know, living that organizer on Zoom life.
What are your calls on a Sunday, the day of rest? What are your calls looking like today?
Oh man, we're doing a webinar with families of incarcerated peoples starting around 3:30, wow. And you know, gathering those who are the most impacted by this mass incarceration system, and a system that's like gravely exasperated by COVID-19, and want to be building relationships actively with family members. And as we take strategies to try to get our loved ones free, we're going to spend today just building with them, figuring out what are their needs, how can mutual aid be responsive immediately in this time, while we're also organizing to free our loved ones from the prison industrial complex. So, you know, just a light Sunday, this Easter Sunday, talking about resurrection and freedom, you know.
Just some light work on a Sunday. Well, Nikita, why don't we start it off with you? You're tuning in you're coming to us from Seattle. Would love just for you to introduce yourself, your work, what you do, and especially just break down what the COVID-19 mutual aid effort is that you're involved in now, to frame our conversation that we'll have.
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thank you, Hollis. Always an honor to spend time with you in MADlines, just two dope women of color holding it down in our various places. So I'm thankful for this network. I'm Nikita. Sometimes I go by KO. And I work with a number of groups. I'm the co-executive director of Creative Justice, which is an arts-based healing engaged space where we partner with young people as they free themselves from the criminal legal system. And an organizer with No New Youth Jail, partnering now with No New Women's Prison, and working with COVID-19 Mutual Aid Seattle, which is an ad hoc group of people who came together, you know, about almost 2 months ago, knowing that we really needed to start building a response to how COVID-19 was going to affect our communities, especially those communities most marginalized already. You know, there are tons of pre-existing conditions of injustice and racial oppression, class and economic oppression, and just understanding COVID-19 is going to be an exacerbator of those things, and in some ways an accelerator of that injustice in our communities. And so we started organizing around 3 core areas. One being mutual aid, the idea that we take care of each other, we keep each other safe, and also the idea of not functioning in this scarcity model. When we come together, when we share, when we build our networks, we actually have enough amongst us. And so using that idea as a way of organizing ourselves to feed, clothe, shelter, get medicine to our community members. The second aspect of our work is worker organizing. You know, in racialized capitalism, racialized capitalism is dependent upon the worker, especially workers that are economically disenfranchised. And so knowing that our essential workers, our grocery store workers, our gig workers, our tech workers, folks working in Amazon warehouses without appropriate PPE, or healthcare workers, are bearing not just the brunt of the front lines, but also they're organizing the resistance and the resilience is key to us coming out of this, hopefully healthier. And then abolition. You know, it's not enough for us to say what we don't want. We need to be thinking about what we do want. And we know that we gotta be getting our loved ones free from the prison industrial complex, get them free from prisons and jails, and hopefully being able to come out of this time with a new framework, a new set of demands that actually keeps our loved ones, especially our Black, Indigenous, folk of color communities, our BIPOC communities, out of the prison industrial complex. So doing a lot of work that we're also seeing happening in places all across the United States. So if you're doing similar work where you live, please hit us up. You can find us at COVID Mutual Aid online on Instagram and on Facebook. And we want to be building this international network as folks are working to take care of each other, so we can have national and global, international solidarity is really what's going to start transforming our situation.
Yeah, say that. That's awesome. Thank you so much for that comprehensive breakdown. And I think it's really amazing to see, like, in these times, like, obviously there's such a critical need and such an emergency now to protect the most vulnerable in our communities, whether that's folks that are incarcerated, who are always vulnerable, and where it's a constant state of public health crisis. But seeing what it looks like right now to organize with the challenge of being isolated, but also with that, focal point of people being able to come together, and what kind of systems can be transformed now. So thank you for breaking that down, and we'll get more into that. But now let's turn it over to Oakland, to my dear MADlines. And I'd love for you to just tell people the work that you've done. She's a Seatown native. She's from Seattle, but she's been in Oakland doing incredible work over the last few years. So yeah, just give us a little intro about you as an artist as well as a teaching artist.
Sure. So I just want to say ashe to everything that Nikita said. And I also want to say thank you, Hollis, for putting this together. And the last thing I want to say is just a sigh, a breath, and a moment, just for everyone to, I hope you're taking care of yourself today. What we're talking about is really, it's very, very stress inducing and scary. And I think one of the beautiful things is being able to spend time with loved ones. And, today is a big, important day especially for the Black community, with a lot of folks, church, whether you go to church or not, your family might have gathered in the past. And so just want to speak on that. As far as myself, my name is Maddie Clifford. I go by MADlines. I've been living in Oakland for a decade. Yes, a decade. And I'm originally from Seattle, Washington, born and raised. And I spent the past 7 years working as a teaching artist at the San Francisco Juvenile Justice Center, which is a short-term youth detention facility for the city and county of San Francisco. I teach weekly workshops in the facility to all youth housed on any given week. So right now I'm not teaching in the inside, and there's a lot of various factors going into that. As an artist, I've released several EPs with a lot of collaborations, as well as working on an independent project. And when Hollis first mentioned this to me, I was like, to be real, I was like overwhelmed with just the thought of talking about mass incarceration in California, because California is such a huge incarceration state. Like it prisons more people than like some developing nations. And so the issue is very, very dire here. But at the same time, the organizing that goes on here in California is really inspiring and really impactful, and often serves as a national model. So I'm going to speak about a couple things that I know about, because I think one of the really interesting things to think about is how, Angela Davis talks about how, prisons don't disappear social problems, they disappear human beings. And that if you can think of any silver lining whatsoever in all of this sadness and trauma that is going to ensue. It's that the issues that have already been below the surface or have been disappeared are going to become more acutely apparent and obvious. And some of the ways that we're responding in this emergency situation can be things that we prolong and keep going. So the two issues that I want to focus on today is homelessness and also basically like patriarchy and just ways that like harm is, hurt people. And some of the organizing that's happened with two different organizations that I know of locally, one in Oakland and one that's actually in SoCal. So yeah, I know that was like kind of long-winded, but that's some of the work that I've been doing as a teaching artist. I wouldn't say like I'm an organizer per se, but as an artist, one of the things I've really started to hold on to is this idea of value. As soon as I came to Oakland, as soon as I came to the Bay Area, which is basically one of the front lines of the housing crisis, is just understanding like as an artist that I was valuable, that I deserve to, have a house and deserve to, do work that impacted the most underserved communities and provide them with the most amazing art that they possibly could have. I have an MFA in poetry and I go in and illiteracy is a big factor as well, and that's being disappeared in our nation's prisons and jails. So yeah, there's so much to talk about. So I'm really excited, and I hope we get to do a little bit of creativity too, because I love the ways that we can blend the two, creativity with justice work and organizing work. So yeah.
Brilliantly said and done. No, I think it's real. I love what you've just highlighted in this moment is really the interconnectedness, like, and taking that quote that you just paraphrased from Angela Davis, talking about, prisons not disappearing social problems, but disappearing human beings. And what does it look like for us to think about the critical need to make who is invisible visible in this moment, and how it's connected to issues such as homelessness, or I know that we've talked in the past about just in general, to your point about value, and then also about harm. And when we incarcerate, who are we perpetuating harm to for the sake of the illusion of law, order, and like civility?
Mm-hmm.
In our country. So, and I hear you in terms of wanting to connect this with creativity too, because yeah, it's hella heavy, and I understand like feelings of overwhelm, especially in California, which it's devastating here in Los Angeles. Like we are absolutely the number one jailer and imprisoner of folks in the world. Like there's no question that that's what's happening. And there's actually been some really fantastic advocacy work from folks who have been organizing for years here that I wanted to shout out as well. If you are on Instagram, you can follow at Youth Justice LA, but they've actually been doing a lot of organizing work in the age of COVID by doing car rallies to bring light to folks that are especially young people who are experiencing detention currently, as well as we actually passed an initiative with flying colors down here to reform LA jails and to take a better look and to hold the sheriff's office and the county jail accountable for ongoing human rights violations and public health violations at jails. So it's really overwhelming, but there's a lot of also amazing organizing work done that folks can tap into. But before we get into that, I'm curious what you two are cooking up in your kitchens now that we've been on lockdown.
I'm gonna keep it 100. I haven't even had a chance to cook anything. I'm sorry. I actually don't have a lot of food right now. So that's something that I need to like figure out. And then also I just feel like I'm in multitasking. So I just haven't had a second.
That's real. And also like, getting food has become like mad stressful. Like grocery shopping has become like, for me, like a completely distracting, like all day event, and totally throws me off my game. So
yeah, and I'm alone. So it's kind of like a process to figure out how to get food, but I'll figure it out.
No, you're good. No pressure. As we are here. Nikita, how about you? What are you working on?
Yeah, man, I feel you on the grocery thing. Part of it is stressful, and part of it is I'm like terrified to be out in public, because it's just real. And as someone who's providing like an essential service to like, delivering money or stipends and supplies to young people and their families. Like, I just feel like it's so important that I also like protect myself when I'm not doing those things. But I am making some field roast with mushrooms and onions, some kale. I'm gonna throw little eggs up in there. Nothing special. I will say I've been cooking a lot more, which is both good for my wallet and probably my body. But you know, it is. I think it is hard when you're used to being with people to eat or with people to cook. Like, food for me is such a community oriented thing that we do, and I miss being with my people's eating. So it definitely has been. I've done a lot of cooking on Zoom because organizer life, but yeah,
No,
love
that's
seeing
cool.
people's recipes.
I think, and again, like this is just kind of showing the tension and the paradox of this moment, how we're like, caring for ourselves and making sure that we're fed and well, but how quickly like that can fall by the wayside. I think for me, I've just been really trying to embrace cooking as being my self-care practice and like a place where I am not looking at a screen. And I totally hear you, Nikita, in terms of like, you're cooking on Zoom because you have to be in the meeting and you have to feed yourself. But it's just finding that balance. And yeah, Maddie, to that end, like being by yourself, it's different for me because it's like I can be like, okay, well, I'm cooking and I'm gonna like cook for my partner and cook for my roommate or whatever. We can collaborate, but there's like definitely challenges and just making sure that you're fed.
Yes.
So I just wanted to show it's nothing gourmet over here either, but basically what I'm doing is I'm like repurposing. I made like burrito bowls last night, so I like chopped up some chicken, put some cumin in it, um, have some black beans and some red peppers. So I'm basically going to reconstitute this into like a breakfast taco this morning. And I'm just adding some Swiss chard, and I'm just basically frying everything up with onions. And then I blended some eggs with my trusty chopsticks, that I'm just going to put on top. So it's like, again, nothing fancy, but I think a lot of us are dealing with the realities of leftovers and like not really being particularly excited about leftovers. So I'm trying to find ways to infuse like fresh ingredients and making things a little bit more festive and enlivened than just like sticking the leftovers into the microwave and nuking them and then being sad while I eat them over the sink, which usually is what happens for me. But anyway, let me see. I want to check in with our audience really quickly. We got folks coming in. We got a lot of people from Seattle. Got a couple folks from LA. People, yeah, that are present. It's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you so much for joining us. And please, if you have any questions or things you want to shout out, please do. I know one of my dear friends, Milk, is in the building, the singer-songwriter. And she and her roommate are tuning in, and wanted to bring up the issue of prison gerrymandering, which I thought was interesting. So maybe that's something that we can tap into once we expound more on what we're here to talk about. So Maddie, maybe let's start with you because as you mentioned, like, it can be like really overwhelming to think about the work that is before us in terms of like how systems can transform in this moment to protect folks that it has historically and currently has been disenfranchising and pushing to the side. So I'm curious from your perspective, like, I think we kind of initially wanted to say, like, what's happening in your region? But I know you and I have talked about how there actually are opportunities right now to take what's being done kind of as an emergency precaution of, like decarcerating or taking folks out, and what that brings to light in terms of value and the way that we reframe our understanding of harm. So I'd love if you could chat a little more about your thoughts around that. And specifically, I know you wanted to cite the new Surgeon General of California as well.
Sure. Okay. So the two areas that I thought about focusing on, I thought about thinking about the Angela Davis quote: "Prisons don't disappear social problems, disappear human beings." Homelessness, unemployment, drug addiction, mental illness, and illiteracy are only a few of the problems that disappear from public view when human beings contending with them are relegated to cages. So I was thinking about this quote and I was like, okay, this is a great way to have this discussion today, because I was thinking I could look at two areas, which is homelessness and mental illness, which are two crises that have already existed in our society that are disappeared through mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex. So first of all, with homelessness, some of the work that's been going on in Oakland has been really, really inspiring. Before COVID popped off, Moms for Housing is a really important organization. Look them up, look at the timeline of their actions and their work. It's moms with the number 4 housing. So what happened is in November, Black mothers basically, went into a home that was vacant in West Oakland and said, we're staying here, we need a place to live, and we have a right to a home. So it caused a lot of, controversy, obviously. It was interesting, even people in the Black community were like being really critical, like, how dare you guys just go into this house? But what ended up happening, and there was even a huge military response to them being there, and they were evicted. But the community came up behind them and was like, you guys are not going to do this. This is a right that everyone has. This is specifically, homelessness is specifically impacting these populations. And it actually drew attention to a number of issues. For example, that there's so many vacant homes in Northern California, in all of California, but specifically in Oakland and in the Bay Area, where, housing is like, it's so difficult to find affordable housing here. It's incredibly hard. And so the fact that there's all these vacant homes was really interesting. And it brought this national attention to the fact that corporations are buying up these houses and like just leaving them vacant. So it was an action that I feel like is a great example of like Black women, leading on the front lines once again in bringing issues to the table that affected, this specific disenfranchised community, which had this ripple effect, which is affecting everyone and bringing attention to an issue that actually does impact a lot of people. And so I wanted to bring up them to say that you can like definitely look them up. And then I wanted to bring them up because I feel like there's this like connection around this idea of like mass incarceration as not helping our communities and not serving our communities and actually contributing harm. They say hurt people, and this idea of like cycles of harm. And so, and another thing that's happening in the Bay Area is there's a lot of really cutting edge work around like restorative justice, around this idea of like, what does it mean to advocate for survivors? I've heard, because right now the COVID issue is so huge and a lot of people, which is a good thing, is people are being released. But what it's bringing up is the fact that we don't have a lot of rehabilitation programs. This was already an issue in the beginning. Recidivism is a huge problem, right? So we're letting all these people out, which is great, but then also we don't have safety nets for folks. They don't necessarily have housing. So it's bringing to light all these problems that have already existed, which we didn't really necessarily look at. So one thing that's happening here is Gavin Newsom is like, he's like wants to run for president. So he's just being all presidential and stuff. I have this joke with my friends that like he looks like the guy from American Psycho, but like older. But anyway, he's really weird. But anyway, he's just, he's like, he's helpful because like, in a sense, he's like, I guess more like, it's better than listening to the federal government because it like really is maddening and stress inducing. One thing that they did last week, which I was happy about, is they had a conversation. Gavin Newsom brought on the first Surgeon General of California, Nadine Burke-Harris, to talk about mental health. And I was so happy that he did that because he talked about how right now we're dealing with as collectively as a work in globally, not just nationally, but like locally as well, this issue of like the trauma that comes from being, sheltering in place. Because people talk about your house is a shelter, but a house is not a shelter for everyone. Some people are at home and dealing with domestic violence, at home dealing with other issues of harm. So I wanted to talk about mental health issues because I feel like that is a really important topic. And Nadine Burke-Harris even spoke, and I would definitely look her up because one of the really cool things about her is she did her research around ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences and the Bayview Hunters Point. And she did studies which really had this huge effect on that on the healthcare as a whole, not just mental health, but the healthcare system, around the fact that people with a huge number of ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences, that could be, growing up with a parent that has mental health challenges or drug abuse challenges, witnessing someone being killed in front of you, all these things that can contribute to your development as a child. They call them ACEs. They don't only have mental health outcomes, but they also have actual literal health outcomes. And so she's created this connection between like the importance of mental health, not just like, and also just looking at like trauma in general from like a really in like a health sense, which I thought was really amazing. And now they're talking about it, with all of California, and hopefully it'll be talked about nationally, how ACEs impact people. And the reason this is important to me, especially, is because as somebody that is a teaching artist with incarcerated youth or youth that are impacted by mass incarceration, by legacies of mass incarceration in California, is that all of my students have ACEs. All of my students have adverse childhood experiences. All of my students have experienced tremendous harm from a very young age, and they're sitting in a jail cell, which is also another way that people are harmed. And so just really looking at the ways that this crisis is happening, this emergency is also, and then Gavin Newsom always talks about eat this moment, which is like kind of corny, but in a sense, it's an opening to like have these conversations. So here's a specific example. So I found a statistic, I think, so there was a spike in DV referrals, a 60% spike in California because of this sheltering in place. And so London Breed, who is an interesting woman, she basically like opened all these like these empty.
Mayor of San Francisco currently, just for
sorry. She opened up these like homes for DV survivors to feel safe. And she's like, okay, they can stay here for 90 days. And it's like, why aren't these places open anytime? Like, why does it take a crisis for us to have conversation with the private sector or demand from the private sector to reduce harm by providing housing for DV survivors or people that are houseless? Like, why is that? Why are we having that conversation now? Like, how can we push, politicians to keep these things in place, and how can we draw attention to what they're doing and what they're not doing to make sure that people's basic needs are being met and also their mental health is being met? So that was something that I thought was really interesting, especially like because DV, like when I say DV, that's domestic violence. It's like a really important window into like harm and the ways in which like issues around toxic masculinity, misogyny, and patriarchy are contributing to mental health issues and to just harm in general. Like, and one of the things that was like really exciting that I found about 2.5 years ago now was this film. It's a documentary called The Feminist on Cell Block Y. And it was directed by Contessa Gales. It's on CNN and you can watch it while you're sheltering in place. And so this was actually, it's a documentary about a guy that starts a feminist group. He doesn't call it that in the jail, but he starts a group in his jail, and they read The Will to Change by Bell Hooks. And it's a cool doc because you start to see the ways in which all of these men of color and working class white men have hella ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and it has contributed to why they are currently incarcerated. And it's just a really good window and a great window into the ways in which we can actually reduce harm and we can actually provide people with like their basic needs. So yeah, so those are the things I want to shout out for people to look up: Moms for Housing, and then The Feminist on Cell Block Y. Another organization is initiatejustice.org, and that's an organization that's doing work in SoCal. So those are the things I wanted to shout out. but I could go on and on. There's like so many different things to talk about. It's kind of
absolutely. And I think that you did a really great job just now in terms of thinking about, you know, it's not so simple as, you know, like obviously we know as fact that incarcerated folks are incredibly vulnerable right now in this moment. I think there's no disputing that to be incarcerated is to be endangered currently with the pandemic, and often is generally. And I think what you're speaking to also, especially thinking about from childhood, how does the system continue to re-traumatize and create trauma for folks that are incarcerated or in the carceral system? And then how are we being thoughtful about how these emergency stopgaps, like for example, as you mentioned, like London Breed being able to open up empty housing for DV survivors, why aren't we being more thoughtful in the moment, or being more thoughtful in a long-term way about how we're protecting folks? Is it because, as we see so often, the prison industrial complex generally and the criminal justice system at large is far more into and more concerned with the punishment and traumatization of those who have committed crimes than the actual protection and rehabilitation of everybody involved and the protection of survivors. So I'm going to put all three of those organizations and the documentary I already put on the chat. So thanks for that. Let's take it over to Nikita now. I don't know where you're at in your home cooking process currently, but I would love to hear more about what the COVID-19 Mutual Aid Fund, as you broke down earlier, has been doing, like specifically in regards to policy initiatives and organizing initiatives to protect the incarcerated in Washington State. Just unmute yourself.
Yeah. So, you know, I want to lift up first, and I should have done this when I spoke initially, is I am living in Seattle, in coastal Salish territories on Duwamish land. And it's never felt more important to me than now to be actively talking about reparations, whether it's reparations for Black folks who are the descendants of formerly enslaved peoples, or reparations for Indigenous and Native folks. Some of what Maddie was talking about, when we think about who's the most likely to be homeless, it is Black and Native peoples here on Turtle Island. And that is directly related to colonialism and imperialism and genocide. And if we're going to address the present injustice we're seeing, we actually have to address the historical injustice. And when we talk about people having homes and having access to places to live, like, we really need to move through a serious process of reparations, of returning land back to Native folks, and ensuring that we work on repairing the harm that has happened to Black and Native communities. So Maddie, I really appreciate you for bringing that up, for talking about housing as a very real justice issue, and how COVID-19 is exacerbating and accelerating that in our communities. And, you know, you see the hashtag free them all. And one of the things people always say to me, well, where are they all going to go? And I think as a community, we have to be actively figuring that out. You know, our municipalities, our governing structures have failed to provide social housing, affordable housing. In Seattle, where I live, corporate and establishment politicians have been afraid to actively tax corporations, big businesses like Amazon and Boeing and Google and Microsoft at the level they should be taxed, so we can afford and fund social housing. And so I think it's very important that we do have this conversation about, where do our loved ones come back to? What a net that works. When we think about a network is a net that works. What are we inviting them into? How are our arms open? What services, housing, protection are we providing is key. And so there are communities in Seattle that we're partnering with that are actually actively thinking about housing for our returned loved ones. COVID-19 Mutual Aid and like our work around abolition has been partnering with Columbia Legal Services. Columbia Legal Services is a nonprofit law group here in Seattle that has filed a suit in the Washington State Supreme Court against Governor Inslee and against the Department of Corrections. And what that suit calls for is the release of our loved ones. And it does provide some criteria about who are the most impacted? Who do we see should be released first? It includes people who have underlying health issues or compromised immune systems. It includes folks who are over the age of 50. It includes folks who have sentences that are 18 months or less remaining. It includes folks who are pregnant. And there are right now 31 clemency petitions, clemency orders that the governor could sign that are sitting on his desk. They've been through the clemency board. They're essentially approved. He just has to sign them. And so this suit represents 5 incarcerated peoples and represents one legal strategy that's being used to require the state, as health experts have said internationally, to decrease the number of folks incarcerated in Washington state prisons. There are 37,000 people. This is a stat from 2010. We'll have, better stats after the census, but 37,000 people in 2010 were incarcerated in the state of Washington. And we're one of the worst. And so not only are there 37,000 people, but it's incredibly racially disproportionate, where Black folks make up 4% of the state, where Black women are 1.6% of the state. We make up 12% of all women incarcerated in prisons, right? So it's disproportionate, and that has an impact on our communities. And so part of what COVID Mutual Aid 19 is doing when it comes to this legal strategy is we're writing an amicus brief. An amicus brief is essentially a friend of the court brief. And you provide amici as a way of giving the court additional information you believe that they should consider when making a determination about what's at hand. And so we want the court to be actively thinking about the families of incarcerated peoples for a number of reasons. One is families want to know their loved ones are okay. When Maddie talks about ACEs, one of these factors of ACEs is the trauma that is experienced living in communities that are affected, deeply impacted by mass incarceration in the prison industrial complex. Having people taken from our communities, from our families, is a traumatic experience. And we cannot ignore that when we talk about quote unquote crime, we're talking about horizontal violence, but rarely ever do we talk about vertical violence, state sanctioned violence, violence that starts with the police, violence that starts with economic disenfranchisement or marginalization, violence that starts with racial oppression and racial injustice. These are factors that often happen before you get to the point where an individual commits a quote unquote crime. And to be quite frank, most people who are in prison are not in prison for what we think about as typical violent crimes like murder, manslaughter, or rape. Most people that are in prison across the nation are in for crimes of survival, things that happen because they were in a traumatic situation due to the injustice and oppression our communities have faced, and they had to make a hard choice. And what I try to encourage people to remember is, if we were feeding folks, sheltering folks, giving people education and opportunity, we could significantly decrease the amount of violence that happens in our community generally by simply stopping state-sanctioned violence, by stopping violence via oppression. I mean, that's public safety 101. When people are cared for, certain things that we consider crimes just don't happen. And so we're wanting the court to consider our families' experiences. We also want the court to know that there are families out here ready, willing, open, want their loved ones to come home, and are ready to give them home, food, shelter, support, and care, and to help them transition back into our communities. And so this amicus brief is due on April 16th, and we're doing a family webinar today because we know that any effort we take has to be led by those most impacted by an issue. My belief is that solutions often live in the space of the folks most impacted, and yet those are often the folks who have the least proximity to power. So as we're building power in community, it's essential that we do that in partnership, in relationship with folks most impacted by an issue. So we've also been working with the Black Prisoners Caucus, receiving calls regularly from folks on the ends, letting us know the conditions, letting us know what they're facing. They're telling us what kinds of demands we should be putting out there. And I just want to be clear, this is one strategy. By trade, I'm an attorney, but in my heart, I'm an artist, I'm an organizer, I'm a community member, and I always want us to keep legal strategies in the space where they belong. It's one tool in our toolkit, and we have to be actively organizing a community. We have to be actively building community power, and we have to be actively caring for each other. The state won't do it for us. And I'll close with this. One of the biggest lessons I feel like I learned from the Black Panther Party when I reflect on history is that when we take care of one another, we actually build much stronger movements. And we saw that when the Black Panthers put in place the free breakfast program, and it was so effective at galvanizing community, that one, we're still talking about it today, and two, the government decided I'm gonna take that over because look how effective it was. So if anything, while COVID-19 is a horrible thing happening to the entire globe, it does present an opportunity for us to have to, in some ways, we're forced to take care of each other and develop infrastructures in our communities that kind of re-inspire this for us, by us, for the people, by the people opportunity in this moment in time.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Nikita. And I think that if there anything, like, it's not tight to be talking about like the opportunity presented by COVID, because it is such an emergency that is like very directly life or death endangering folks that are vulnerable. And what does it look like to start building organizing models and networks and systems of care and mutual aid that can persist and can set a new track for the way that we're able to connect with each other and care for each other. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you both for that super deep dive. And in a moment, I'm going to be asking each of you to share a creative piece so that we can get more into that creative aspect, to your point, Nikita, of making sure that we're using all the things in our toolbox. But I want to get to a couple of questions that we've had in the chat. One question was, how can folks of like disproportionate privilege, so those of us who aren't being impacted by incarceration currently, how can we best advocate for and connect with folks that are doing the organizing work to protect people that are currently imprisoned?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one is there are tons of organizations, Maddie's mentioned a few, I've mentioned a few, that are going to absolutely need support, whether that's financial support or the support of you going to your communicating and advocating for the strategies we're putting out there, and saying to your community, like, these are strategies we need to back. Or, you know, some of these organizations actually have strategies for folks with disproportionate levels of privilege to get involved in the way that their privilege becomes useful, right? So I think it's important to get connected to people. Do so without expecting to be able to do anything. Sometimes being a body, being a person present, just sharing a tweet or a post is useful. I wouldn't say it's enough, because I think the next step then is, once you're in relationship, to be open to direction. Let the folks most impacted tell you how they want to move, and you just follow that lead. And then lastly, again, I cannot emphasize how important it is for folks with disproportionate privilege, or folks with racial privilege or class privilege, to be organizing people in that community. It is exhausting for Black folks, for incarcerated folks, for Indigenous communities to be doing the work of taking care of each other, of organizing demands, of constantly shutting things down, or being the one that's saying this is wrong, and then simultaneously also having to turn around and educate a community which says they want to have our back. So we need you to go out and organize and educate white folks who think that they're liberal, folks who do have class privilege and class are not marginalized in the same way by the economic system, and get them on board with why following the demands of the most impacted and the work that we're doing is important. I'm sure Maddie has a lot to add.
Absolutely. No, I think that's so super real. And I think it's that balance of, and I can just speak from the perspective of a non-Black POC person, where I think so often, like I've seen folks say in my Asian American community who understand our relative privilege within the general racial hierarchy of the United States, and how our adjacency to white privilege and thus white supremacy has been used to really continue to and amplify the oppression of Black and Indigenous folks. But I think sometimes we get a little bit like, oh, okay, well, we might not know what's best because we're not most impacted. So we're just going to like chill and wait and see and be led. And that's actually in and of itself skirting our privilege and our ability to organize within our community, to break down and to confront the, the anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous sentiment, to educate and to organize within our own group. So I really hear that charge, and I hope that folks that are tuning in can also hear that as well. Not only connecting directly to the organizations, and I'm Maddie, I'd love to switch over to you, MADlines, and hear what you have to say about this, but I'm putting all of the links that you're sending me into the chat so that folks can access those organizations as well. But I know that it really starts with self-education and then galvanizing the folks of relative privilege in your groups to make sure that folks are being plugged in, and it's not just like a one and done. I sent $50, so I'm feeling good about myself and I'm done now. So yeah, I don't know, MADlines, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add, because we didn't mention it, cisgendered men and people that are heterosexual, because you guys have privilege too. There's disproportionately, LGBTQ folks that are affected by mass incarceration. And we know that incarceration has a lot to do with, patriarchy and misogyny, and men not being able to be fully human, their human selves, especially men of color and working class white men. So being able to have those conversations, I know for me, like I teach, I've been teaching incarcerated kids for almost 7 years, and it's definitely really difficult work, especially because as a woman of color, I realize how much most of this people that I'm teaching are young boys, and how much more easy the work would be if I had more men of color like kind of backing me up on the outs, because I say all these things to them, I give them all my love and all my support, and yet they're getting so much other conditioning that's really, really impactful and negative towards them. And that's why I mentioned the feminists on Cell Block Y once again, because it's a great example of men of color working together to combat issues and to look deeply at the way they've been harmed in order to understand, how they can be such supportive members of community. They already are, but like how to be even more. I really loved how Nikita talked about vertical systems of oppression as opposed to horizontal one. I'm saying that correctly, right? I hope I don't have it mixed up. But basically the institutional oppression as opposed to oppression that happens at the ground level, and remembering that like rich white men commit such atrocious harms against all communities, and yet very, very few of them are ever, held accountable or punished for the ways that they wreak havoc on millions and millions of people, right? So just looking at how important it is to really deal with misogyny and patriarchy and heteronormativity, and how I think that's an area of privilege that we don't talk about, and that people can really step up to the plate.
Yeah. Say that. Calling on you, cis male humans, to see what's good and to confront. And I think it's just a call. I think it's interesting in this time, everybody wants to be as impactful as possible, but I think the real lesson that I'm hearing from this is like, to be truly impactful, it takes putting in the work, putting in the educational work of yourself and reading and connecting to folks and making sure that you're hearing perspectives for the most marginalized. It means putting in the work to connect with the people that you're in community with, to make sure that everybody is staying accountable to their relative privilege and to the safety mechanisms that are put in place for our benefit, instead of thinking about how the wellness of us all is being impacted. And really doing the work to research and to connect with the organizations and be led, and both be led and feel the initiative to come to the table and to hear and to listen and to like witness in a meaningful way, and find how we can best plug in. So thank you both for your insight and your wisdom. And I don't know, I'm just always so blown away by both of you, and so impressed and thankful for your work. So I'd love to close this out with a performance from each of you. And there was also a question from the audience in terms of what art, poetry, film, or music is giving you life and hope right now. So I'd love if each of you could maybe just preface your piece in terms of, or before or after really, but perform it. Also let us know what we should be looking at in addition to your fantastic work itself. So Nikita, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I also wanted to just take a minute to also, Maddie, I really thank you for bringing up like our LGBTQ, our queer and trans community, which is one of the fastest growing populations in prisons. I also want to remember our undocumented communities. There are folks trapped in the Northwest Detention Center here in Washington, who have been brutalized and are even more brutalized and in an even more challenging space as COVID-19 is exasperating that situation. And so I really want to, and I'm not great at this. Asking for money is so hard for me, which makes being a co-executive director hard. But just shout out to Bana for pushing me here. Like, if you have access to economic resources, please donate to funds like the COVID-19 Mutual Aid Seattle Fund. It's not necessarily going to us organizers to do the work. It is going directly to communities who need access to funds, especially families of incarcerated people and undocumented peoples. I know that those of us who might get this little fake ass stimulus check, I feel like we might get access to little resources through the bureaucracy, but the truth of the matter is undocumented peoples cannot access anything that the government offers for the most part. And so we need to be actively taking care of our undocumented community members. And this fund is purposely ensuring that some of our funds go there. So I also want to shout out La Resistencia, which is leading the way on the work around shutting down the Northwest Detention Center, and folks should plug into that. Folks should plug into No New Women's Prison, which is to stop the building of a new women's prison called Maple Lane here in Washington. We don't need new prisons. We need new affordable housing. So I hope y'all will get involved in some of those struggles. But if you got financial resources, donate, please, 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 please. What art is keeping me alive? Man, I'll be transparent. I feel like I'm busier now than I was before we were told to stay at the house because it feels like I can work and organize nonstop from Zoom. And so finding balance has certainly been a challenge. I also feel like as somebody who has a little bit of public visibility, I feel a unique sense of responsibility to be constantly sharing and talking about these important issues. And so it's been a little hard to be balanced, but every Sunday I've been meeting with a group of artists. We're working on some like projects that we want to see come out of this time. And like today, we spent about 15 minutes writing separately on some writing prompts, and then spent the rest of the time talking about what we wrote and how those are seeds for what we want to see come out of this time. So for me, it's actually been finding ways to congregate digitally or virtually with other artists and talk story and then do a little bit of writing. So I want to thank you, Hollis, for doing this brunch, for having artists and organizers and folks come on, because sharing ideas and sharing story and sharing our heart work is actually so important for the inspiration moving forward. Cultural workers are the first people that a colonizer or imperialist force takes out, because we preserve the history of a people, which helps the people know who they are and where they're going. And so I want to shout out our cultural workers, many of whom are struggling right now. You should also apply to funds like the COVID-19 Mutual Aid or the fund that Gabe and Ijeoma are doing, the Artist Relief Fund, and get some support. So I'll be quiet now and do this poem.
Yay.
Let's go down to the river to pray, studying about those good old days, and who shall wear the golden crown. Good Lord, show me the way. Oh, family, let's go down. Let's go down. Don't you want to go down? Oh, family, let's go down to the river to pray. I can hear my auntie in the back of the chapel singing. My Baba leans over to me and she says, baby, let's go down to the river to pray. We make our way down into the valley. She says, watch how water moves, how it starts in the sky makes its way down the mountainside, how it settles in the valley, the place below, how it settles in the place where it is most needed, usually the place that is most low. She says, watch how water moves over, around, or through a thing if it has to. Remember that your body is made mostly of water, that you must learn to move like water over, around, or through a thing if you have to. She tells me that without us, there is no resistance. Without us, the system persists in its defiance, dividing and conquering from the unity that is our body with this earth, our mother, from the unity is our body with each other. That's what she tells me. See how cash rules everything around us, steadily blocking these attempts to break free. She said, understand there can be no fair trade agreements when Black bodies are still sold as stocks and bonds and jail cells that let us politicians are building their wealth on these Black and brown bodies, markedly marketed, targeted, murdered extrajudiciously with impunity, not just locally, but globally by the same hands that stole our people from our homelands, the same hands that brought us to someone else's homelands, the same hands that'll feed us to these homelands, try to sell us back our homelands overprocessed and overpriced till we become underfed. But yo, I come from a resilient people, a still living people. I still hear people in the land of the free, the home of the slave. Shit, I keep getting that wrong. The land of the free, the home of the braves. Has anyone asked why we don't tell their whole stories? Why we make them invisible amongst us? While the rivers round us run red with blood? I got it. We don't ask so they don't have to tell the truth. And the truth is it's these politics, many ticks, blood-sucking politicians where the only thing redder than their fangs is their blood-stained hands. Look at them, elbow deep in the cookie jar. Let's call it capitalism. Who pays the toll for the feudalism while the 10% prosper on bodies and profits and the rest of us race to the bottom in chains and body bags to be buried much more than 6 feet deep beneath more fair trade agreements where the only thing fairly traded is our rage against this machine. A machine that will have you believe you will never have enough. You will never be enough. But yo, enough is enough is enough is enough is enough is enough. If we just said it was enough. My Baba pulls me back down to earth, lost in all the thoughts. She asked me to tell her what I see. She says, look here in this water and tell me, baby, what do you see? And I think it's a trick question. But I tell her honestly, well, Baba, I see me. And she says, that's right. You see you in the water and the water is in you. Understand that justice is what love looks like in public. And if you cannot love yourself, you cannot love anyone else. If there is not love, there is not justice. And since we know that justice is just us being just us, without us, there is no justice. She says it again, just in case I missed it. She says, justice is just us being just us. Without us, there is no justice. She tells me, watch how water moves, how it starts in the sky above, makes its way down the mountainside, settles in the valley below in the place where it is most needed. Watch how water moves over, around, or through a thing if it has to. And baby, you must learn to move over, around, or through a thing if you have to. Thanks so much, y'all.
Hey, that was so dope. Thank you so much, Nikita, for sharing all of that. And thank you for the work that you do in our community. We cannot thank you enough. Attorney, artist, speaker of truth. And thank you for, committing your Sundays to being on Zoom calls to make sure that folks are represented and at the table. We hella appreciate it. And we hella appreciate your art practice. And I know it's hella hard to carve out time to keep that alive, but I'm really glad to hear about your artist group because it really is the most important thing, not just to stave off burnout, but just to ensure that the creative work that you do is being just as nurtured as the activism work that's so desperately needed. So thanks, Nikita. We appreciate you so much. Maddie, I'm going to pass it over to you, my love. Would just love to hear to the earlier question about what kind of art, music, poetry is bringing you solace and getting you through right now. And then would love to hear some of your work.
Sure. So let's see. I really like the new Empress of album. I don't know if y'all heard of her. She's dope. Her music it's a really good blend of being upbeat, but the lyrics are really deep and empowering. And so I've been trying to be really clear about what I listen to. I like to listen to something that's kind of a beat, or sometimes I like to listen to jazz right when I wake up in the morning. And what else have I been doing? I've been listening to a lot of instrumentals. So I actually, the homie Chris Carroll just put out one instrumental album, and what I've been doing is freestyling over instrumentals as like something that's like cathartic, and it's a process that's about like trusting yourself and trusting your intuition and trusting the improvisation of this moment of having to like shift and change accordingly. I would also say Thundercat, It Is What It Is, just came out. Good album. Bosco put out an album. Who else? Yeah, so Little Dragon, new album out. You might already know about that, but yeah, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of music that's coming out. Those are artists that are a little bit bigger though, and I think it's important to, or bigger as in like have industry backing or industry support. So also keep in mind when you're listening to stuff or when you're buying music to buy music at the local level. Bandcamp is really great for as a platform to buy music because they give a lot of the money to artists. Oh, and I got to shout out my sis, Ciamara, that's spelled with an X. And she is just my friend, and I just want to shout her out. So listen to her album. It's called 1990. Yeah. That's it. You're muted, but
I would love if you could round this out with a piece of your own.
Yes. So I'm gonna do a few verses, and just take it away. And then I thought it'd be cool to do a little freestyle to give you a sense of like something that you can do on your own. So I'm gonna do written first, and then I'm gonna freestyle using this book. You can freestyle with everything. I've been doing like tarot freestyling, or I have this card, this deck that basically just gives you like different words that have to do with nature for freestyling. But I'll start off with this verse. This is like interesting to see. You really want to get like the speaking word.
Maddie, the audio might be wonky, but go.
What happened?
Audio might be wonky if you're playing it on your
computer. All right. Well, I'll just do old school because this audio. Okay. Like this. So much on my mind, I can't recline. What you think this is? Too poetic? Now my flows is energetic. Overhead, flight attendants, feel the tension. You're looking like you ain't right in the head. I'm killing zombies, walking dead. They once fled. Now they flock to the town. Still females barter their bodies for that De Niro. And pigs is busting cash to watch them spill slow. Never lost my will though. I will grow. I will stack. Girls like me are needles in a basic bitch's haystack. All my exes know that. Don't call me bro. It's just a throwback. I'm too ill. It takes a strong will. But speaking that truth from the jump, rolled up my speed, please, made it happen. No jumping on bad wagons, fool, this is my passion. Kids nowadays is lacking rites of passage. So I bust like a grill in the middle passage. Hella classic. See, you can try your hardest. I do me regardless. The thought is what counts, what amounts to flows of holy water. You can douse, you can swim, or you can drown, you can swim, or you can swim, or you can. You can try your hardest. I do me regardless. The thought is what counts, what amounts to flows of holy water. You can douse, you can swim, or you can drown, you can swim, or you can swim, or you can. I got a gut feeling. Call it women's intuition. Say I'm tripping. I'm seeing visions, will empower precision. The cosmos got a dialect, it's in my bones. Rosetta Stone, you clones. Copycatting off, it's how you come across. I floss, sue me. I shine like my name was Ruby Bridges. First one in the trenches. First one on the front line. Ain't nothing to investigate. Clairvoyant state. Got a lot on my plate. At least I'm at the table now. Don't ask me how. I've been famished for a while. Hungry. You could see my ribs. Vultures circling like they had dibs. Funny how they trick us into questioning our gifts. So scientific that it's spiritual. How a body speaking scripture. Wish I could paint a pretty picture, but the truth is the real elixir. You can try your hardest. I do me regardless. The thought is what counts, what amounts to flows of holy water. You can douse, you can swim, or you can drown, you can swim, or you can. You can swim, or you can. You can try your hardest. I do me regardless. The thought is what counts, what amounts to flows of holy water. You can douse, you can swim, or you can drown, you can swim, or you can. You can swim, or you can. Face of music, metaphysical. My verses can be fire, can be water, also known as flow. Can be air, cool breeze of the earth to help you grow. All natural, like some vegetables. Yes, some vegetables in a comatose. Been known to rose, been known to diagnose. Make you face yourself, the nursery back to health. It's like you took an L as a lesson. Why you stressing out the ego death? Bet you thought that there was nothing left. Take a breath and have some self-respect. Doubt is merely emotional clutter. I'm a mother to you muggles, don't get in trouble. Just stay humble. Thought you was deep and you was just a puddle. Might burn you to the ground just to see what's growing from the rubble. Oh my God, fire squad is going off. If life's a stage and I'm just making sure I'm not a prop. This is labor that I love, so I answer when opportunity knocks. See, you can try your hardest. I do me regardless. The thought is what counts, what amounts to flows of holy water. You've been doused. You could swim or you can drown. You could swim or you can. You could swim or you can. You can try your hardest. I do mean regardless. The thought is what counts, what amounts to flows of holy water. You've been doused. You can swim or you can drown. You can swim or you can. You can swim or you can. Okay, so that's my like writtens. If I had a beat, so you can do this on your own, play the beat and you, actually there's two different activities you can do. Play an instrumental and actually write down like 20 words about how you feel. And then when the instrumental is playing, let's say I'm doing it right now. This is my instrumental, which is me snapping. I'm just looking for words and I picked this book, The Alchemist, for a reason. It's a great book. Okay, Omen. Omen, you was hoping that I was swollen with ideas, but I really gotta find them. Yeah, it's coming from the top of the dome. I'm feeling at home. I found a poem in the zone. I had coffee. Yeah, I'm not a carbon copy. Yeah, I know you wanna be with me, but I can't do that. This boy smiled. Yeah, I got style. Yeah, I look for miles and miles like I'm running. Soon gunning, soon coming undone. No fun, hun. Stones, don't throw stones at a glass house. You know what I'm about. Gotta scream and shout. Representing card. Yo, I feel like I'm working hard, but I really feel like I'm scarred in my body, not a carbon copy. Ooh, see you, but I really gotta do this like morning dew. I really raised from the dead like an omen, but really gets a poem like Jesus Christ. Ooh, I look so nice. Ooh, I got that ice cold with it, but bring it back. Not trying to stack that money. No, I'm trying to stack that love coming from above. I want to give you a hug, but I can't. So that's how I would do it if I was freestyling. And I do it sometimes on my Instagram. So if you ever want to watch it, you guys can watch it. But once again, I want to thank Hollis and Nikita. I love y'all. And thank you so much for talking this morning.
It's like I'm leaving this conversation just very grateful for your work in the world, grateful for, I mean, it's like basic and fundamental to say like speaking truth to power as if that's just kind of like a thing that's easy to do, but it's years of craft and years of commitment that have got y'all to the place where you are leaders in our community, in our creative communities, in our organizing communities, and just incredibly thankful for your time and your energy. And I know that our faithful chat people here that have been tuning in up and down the West Coast are very thankful. And I think, we had somebody from the chat, Maddie, be like, how do you keep from getting in your head when you freestyle? Like,
yo, it's such a good exercise. One of the biggest things to do is when you're first starting, you might notice that you say, I don't know a lot. And I feel like freestyling is a practice and like letting go of saying, I don't know, or like, Hollis mentioned this a lot when we were growing up, like we were super like women's empowerment, and we realized like how often we talk in like simile, or we're afraid to admit that we know something, or that we say, I don't know a lot. So it's actually I would say it's a practice in like noticing when you're doing that and then letting it go. And I've let it go a lot of times. So like now I'm getting better, but it's a practice. You just kind of have to come back to it over and over.
absolutely. That's so real. Do you, and y'all have I'm really bad at this, but if you're watching this right now and you could do me the favor of subscribing to my channel, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I also have an ongoing Patreon for the folks. Some people who are watching today are already supporters on Patreon. Thank you so much to y'all. But if you want to support as little as $5,
album, shout it out.
Album shit. But yeah, do you guys have any last words that you'd like to share to the audience before we sign off and get back to our Sundays?
Man, I just want folks to get involved. You know, what we do for each other, like in any time, how we take care of each other really is like the biggest indicator of public safety. But especially in this time of this crisis and pandemic, taking care of each other is even more important. And remembering that mutual aid is not transactional. It should not be charity. Mutual aid should be about mutually caring for one another in the ways that we can for each other. And also just encouraging people, like, take care of yourself, to all the organizers out there. I know what it's like to go to bed thinking about something and wake up thinking about something, but you got to sleep, you got to drink water, you need to be on your food medicine, you know. If you don't know a herbalist, holler at somebody so we can find you one, because Western medicine is only going to do so much for you. But you know, take care of ourselves, take care of each other is like foundational to coming out of this, and at least coming out of this together, you know.
Yeah, that's so real. Thank you, Nikita. I appreciate you. Maddie, any last things you want to share?
Yeah, so this is so one of the things I do with my students is I do a yearly site publication. So I publish my students' poetry, and so it is called Free Me Fast. And I just want to read one of my students' poems. It's called A Blood Red Midnight Black. I am a midnight black thunderclap, heartbroken and confused. I'm a blood red siren, ecstatic and vengeful. Find me, I'm at a crime scene. Find me, I am within state prisons. You can hear me if you try, most people refuse to listen. I'm a cloud gray cry, hopeful and homesick. Find me on the horizon, I will be striving to succeed. If you hear me, please help, don't just leave me on my knees. So yeah, I just want to say thank you, and definitely take really good care of yourself. That's super, super important right now. And also I would shout out on Instagram, specifically for Black people, the NAP Ministry. Have y'all heard of it? It's like a Instagram, I think it's an organization, but they're all about napping and like reclaiming napping, because, and this is really important specifically for Black people, because and also Indigenous folks and our Latinx brothers and sisters, is that like sleep deprivation is one of the main ways that the systems oppress us. And so it's actually really important for us to rest and like take naps, and like ideas around rest are super on point. So the NAP Ministry, if you feel uncomfortable with napping or you feel like it's not okay for you to rest, definitely look for things online or look for support around reclaiming your rest, because you deserve to rest.
Oh yeah, thank you. And with that, we are going to sign off here, but I think those are resounding words. Thank you, Maddie, for reading poetry from one of your students in incarceration, because I feel like that's really important. The sentiment in general, just like, hear me, do you see me? And also making sure that you hear and see yourself, and when you need to sleep and when you need to nap. So with that, sending you guys love. There you go. Paint your dreams. Free Me Fast. Everybody check out MADlines, MAD.LINES. On Instagram, and Nikkita Oliver on Instagram and Twitter. Love you guys both so much. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope to see you all soon. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Love you guys.